To this end, I conducted 12 audience surveys at CCM concerts across Europe. This resulted in a sample of 1,428 audience members. Additionally, a smaller survey was conducted at 3 classical music concerts, with a smaller sample of 670 respondents. Here are the participating institutions that are all members of the Ulysses Network for Contemporary Music. The network includes a range of institutions, small and large, with some focused more on production, such as composer academies, like Darmstadt or Time of Music in Finland, while others focus more on performing and disseminating new works. Ensembles like Ensemble Divertimento, Ensemble Modern, but also festivals such as the Ultima Festival and Gaudeamus in the Netherlands, and also larger venues such as Urkam, Snape Maltings, and Flagey. One concert was surveyed per institution. Overall, I aimed to survey a range of musical styles within CCM. 33 pieces were recorded in the study, everything from Fernie Howe and James Clark to Arvo Pärt and also younger composers. A range of different event formats were covered in the survey, including audiovisual pieces and a participatory installation. All audience members were given an equal chance of filling out the questionnaire. It was typically in the local language. This was discussed in arrangement with the participating institution. And the data was analysed using standard quantitative statistical methods. But there was also qualitative analysis of comments and analysis on a case study level. I'll now present some of the overall findings from the study. In terms of demographics, the average age of the sample was 48 years, and that places the average age of contemporary classical music audience members between that of classical music, which tend to be older, and that of pop music, which tend to be younger. I found that this is a genre that can actually appeal to both younger and older audience members, unlike other musical genres. There was actually quite a lot of heterogeneity of age. What we're dealing with here is definitely, once again, a very educated, select proportion of society who are also very culturally engaged. So just over half of the sample had a master's degree, and over a third attend more than 21 live music events a year, which is a very, very high level of cultural participation. The level of education was actually higher among the contemporary classical music audience as opposed to the classical music audience. The vast majority of the sample had been to a CCM concert before, but there was a small group of first-time attendees, 217 of them, in the audience sample, and that was really exciting to capture their responses. The musical expertise, actually more so than education, emerged as an important factor in my sample. And it was a significant predictor of the frequency of CCM concert attendance. And essentially that means that the higher someone's level of musical expertise, the more CCM concerts they visited. And in the sense, musical education was actually a more important factor in predicting the likelihood that someone would attend a CCM concert than general education. So having musical training is very, very important in terms of engaging with contemporary classical music. Turning now to musical taste, audiences were asked the question, which musical genres do you listen to regularly? Interestingly, classical music was the most frequently chosen genre overall, not contemporary classical music or pop music or any other genre. And this really speaks to the connection between newly composed classical music and older classical music. Older respondents, so those who are 50 and over, were more likely to combine CCM with jazz or classical music, typically highbrow combinations, whereas under 35s were much more omnivorous, both in the sense that they listen to a higher number of different genres, but also cross boundaries more within their listening tastes. And they also mix CCM more readily with pop genres such as electronic dance music, hip-hop, and other musical genres. And this connection with alternative pop and other forms of music that some audience members make led me to call CCM a high art subculture. I find that it holds a contradictory position in the musical field. It has something critical or anti-mainstream about it, but yet it functions firmly within the institutional structures of high art. And it's definitely a genre that has a very transient status. It appeals to different people for different reasons. Continuing discussions of where to place contemporary classical music in the musical field, I researched associations of the term contemporary classical music using an association task. Audience members were presented a choice of 15 adjectives and asked to circle 3 that best corresponded to their view of the genre. What resulted was one of the first large-scale investigations into the perceptions of CCM. The word experimental was chosen most frequently and had much more of a resonance with audience members than terms like new or avant-garde. And interestingly, for the classical music sample, which also were given this audience association task, challenging was the most frequently chosen word, then followed by experimental, which implies that there is still this idea of associating contemporary classical music with newness and experimentalism, but for classical audiences, this is seen more through the lens of a challenge, as something that might be difficult. The association terms difficult, strange, boring, and different, these more negative terms, were not that frequently chosen overall, but when they were chosen, they were selected by CCM Newcomers more often. So those are the first-time attendees at CCM concerts. Additionally, I found the link between choosing words such as difficult, strange, and boring, and actually having lower levels of satisfaction with the live experience, which sheds light on a connection between what people think about CCM more generally and how they actually experience it. Worryingly enough, the term elitist was not very frequently chosen at all, but when it was mostly by young professionals, so young composers and performers often between the ages of 18 and 24. And this gives a sense of who is actually getting frustrated with the status quo in this field. Those first-time attendees were more socially motivated than attendees that had been before. This means that they were more likely to attend because they know someone performing or they attended with friends and family, as opposed to being motivated to hear a specific work or a specific composer or performer. They felt significantly less communicated with by the performers than attendees that had been before. They felt significantly less informed about the music. And in terms of how they responded to the music specifically, they tended to give positive responses, but they did choose the negative terms such as strange and difficult to listen to more frequently. And that was a different task from the one I presented before that involved a series of 8 adjectives that audiences could select in response to the music that they heard. And what about whether those newcomers said that they would return or not? Well, newcomers were likely to return, they reported, but there seems to be a re-attendance gap. They were significantly less likely to come back than those who had been before, only giving a rating of 3.6 out of 5 versus 4.5 out of 5. And interestingly, it really was the quality of experience at the event that predicted whether or not they said they were likely to re-attend or not actually demographic factors. So it didn't matter whether that first-time attendee actually had quite a high level of musical experience. It was more about their satisfaction with the event that made them likely to say that they would return. And this is exciting because this is something that can be focused on from an organisational perspective and from performers, like how can we actually engage and make that more of an interesting experience, a motivating experience for newcomers. And getting into that newcomer experience a bit more, I have some comments from first-time attendees. And these indicate how making contact with CCM can really be quite difficult. This event reinforces for me the idea of a music that is far too scientific and abstract. It arouses no emotions, it is directed at insiders. This music does not speak to me, despite the very good quality. It is important that events like this take place. I think contemporary classical music has been pushed to levels that make it difficult to comprehend. It needs too much knowledge or preparation to enjoy. And the opinions expressed here are all expressed quite carefully. There's a lot of use of phrases such as, for me, it's like this, or to me, it seems like this, suggesting that there might be other people who understand this art form better and kind of get it, and they feel like they are not part of that group. And I think it's also telling that the idea that the whole venture shouldn't be questioned is quite clear here. So this respondent at the bottom saying that it's important that events like this can take place, and yet in the next line they wonder about how comprehensible this music actually is and whether it speaks to them or not. And I found that these kinds of comments were very, very different from the tone in which experts in environments in which there are lots of composers or performers in audiences, such as at Darmstadt, for example, the ways in which those experts express their opinions is very different, much more self-assured, often even scathing. And that's very different from the kind of caution and insecurity that newcomers seem to feel. And I had views that were similar to these comments from classical audiences about what they think of CCM. Across all the pieces at the survey concerts, those that were considered most emotive, enjoyable and engaging by audience members had significant extra musical elements. These included staging, audiovisual elements, or audience participation. What was particularly interesting was that audiences frequently connected more strongly to these works than to similar but standard format works by the same composer on the same programme. For instance, this audiovisual piece by Olga Neuwirth, a film music war requiem, was featured alongside other standard format pieces of hers, but the film work stood out not only in the adjectives selected in that task on the questionnaire, but also in the comments spontaneously left behind by audience members. And these really emphasise the importance of the film in the audience experience. Film and music was a very moving and powerful experience. The film was a revelation and very moving. Not our normal musical fare, but very glad we came. Film footage was remarkable. The film element contributed enormously. And what some of these comments show that while the work as a whole might seem clear and a kind of Gesamtkunstwerk for the composer, audience members are more likely to pick and choose parts that spoke to them more and give weight to different aspects of the experience. And here, clearly, the visual was very important in creating an engaging and moving experience. And judging by the comment, not our normal musical fare, but very glad we came, the event also managed to convince audience members for whom CCM is not part of the music they listen to or the events they typically attend. The events of the participatory formats highlighted how involving audience members and granting them agency transforms the audience experience and its demographic makeup. In Control by Alexander Schubert, presented at the Ultima Festival in 2018, audience members acted as participants in a chain of surveillance and command, navigating the darkened basement of a former bank according to directions from performers and other audience members. Nothing was projected onto the VR goggles you see here. Instead, these were used to support a camera and to restrict the participants' peripheral vision. The audience also had the option of just observing the piece by watching the feed from the cameras on screens upstairs. From this room, it would have been hard to tell who was really performing and who was just participating. I compared responses from the participants and the observers, finding that the participants had significantly more memorable and satisfying experiences with the piece than observers. This is also the youngest audience across the whole sample, and they had the most omnivorous listening tastes, mostly listening to electronic dance music and hip-hop, rather than classical music, jazz, or any of the highbrow genres. And interestingly enough, this concert also had among the highest proportion of CCM newcomers in the sample. Participation of a different kind was also key at the Ensemble Divertimento concert in the sample, which took place in Milan in 2018. Here, a work for amateur choir by Gabriele Manca was programmed alongside other works by the same composer and a number of other pieces. The New Voices Choir is run by the ensemble itself and consists of roughly 40 singers with little to no musical training. This choral work by Manca, Lettres comme à l'envers, was considered the most emotive and enjoyable work on the programme, despite the musical similarities to the other works of Manca's on the programme. By involving these musicians, not only did the other audience members with less experience of CCM come along. The most frequently chosen motivation was, I know someone performing. But the experience of the music was shifted by the social factor of knowing the performers. This concert reached new audience members most extensively. It was the event in the survey that reached the highest proportion of audience members that were both new to the institution, to the Ensemble Divertimento, and to CCM. There was also slightly more variation in educational background, with more vocational degree holders attending than elsewhere. This speaks to the power of changing the usual relationship between audience performer, with amateur music making in particular providing an important means of connecting with new, different audiences and creating meaningful musical experiences.